I enjoy video games. I'm sure you, who is watching this video, also enjoys video games. Elden Ring is a video game published by From Software. It is the magnum opus of Hidetaka Miyazaki, the main producer of the Dark Souls series, as well as Bloodborne, Demon's Souls, and Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. Of the Soulsborne series, I myself have only played a little bit of Dark Souls Remastered. I've played through Dark Souls 3 twice, and I've played through Sekiro twice. Not the most experienced player, but I've had my fair share. I decided to make this video because I was beyond hyped for Elden Ring. The last game I had been this excited for was Doom Eternal back in 2020. I had very, very high hopes for the game, and From Software advertised it as their best work yet. A couple days before the launch of the game, several, and I mean several, game review websites were giving it a 10 out of 10. It had the best launch out of any Soulsborne game on just Steam, not even including consoles. All this is to say, I thought I would be having the time of my life with this game. I thought this would be my new favorite game I've ever played, easily beating Doom Eternal, hallowed be its name. But it wasn't. Despite all of the incredible reviews, all of the amazing advertising, and a genuine effort to get more people into this game, Elden Ring has not become my favorite game. It is good, but I think it has some severe problems that prevent it from being a 10 out of 10 completely perfect game for me. Bear in mind, all of this will be purely my own opinion, based on my experience of one full playthrough of the game. I will start the video with the positives, and then go on to the negatives, and then a summarization / final word at the end. And it should go without saying, but there will be major spoilers ahead. Cry about it. With all that said, let's get into the positives of Elden Ring. The music in Elden Ring, I believe, is some of the best work to have ever come out of the Souls series. Previously, Dark Souls 3 held that title for me, but I think Elden Ring completely blows DS3 out of the water with its soundtrack. There's a major difference here. Elden Ring has gone towards a stronger sense of fantasy than Dark Souls did, and the soundtrack followed suit. In Dark Souls, every song was specifically tailored to the boss it was given to. The song, by itself, can tell the story of the boss while you are fighting it. To get a more detailed explanation of the music, I recommend watching Davi Vosk's videos over the various boss themes. He reacts to the song using music theory to piece together things about the boss. The songs in Elden Ring seem more bombastic, giving a larger-than-life sense when you are fighting the boss the song is associated with, which is definitely the case. The best examples of this are Godric the Grafted's theme, Star Scourge Radon's theme, and the final boss theme, aptly titled Final Battle. The songs are a lot faster and energetic than most of the songs in Dark Souls, helping set the mood while you are fighting the demigods of the lands between. Graphically speaking, I do think Elden Ring looks the best out of any game FromSoft has made. Comparing the locations of Elden Ring to the areas in Dark Souls 3 is like night and day, in some cases literally. Take, for example, Siofra River, and by extension, Nokron. These two areas, in my opinion, look better than any of the areas in Dark Souls 3, other than maybe the kiln of the First Flame. The effects for magic look the best they have, usually being a bright blue for the glintstone sorceries, or occasionally a beautiful purple. The colors of the game are a lot more vibrant and pleasing to the eye in comparison to the bleak, dark, and gothic areas of the Dark Souls series. The open world of Elden Ring is unique in the fact that it combines the linearity of Dark Souls with the expansiveness of an open world game. It is large, but there is almost always something to do. Where there is a large area of flat grass, it's usually littered with groups of enemies to kill. This is engaging for the player and incentivizes combat and engagement with the enemies, as you'll soon be in dire need of the runes they drop, as the amount required to level up will increase exponentially as you play the game. The environments in Elden Ring are varied, but at the same time don't feel unnatural when placed next to each other. For example, the Weeping Peninsula acts almost as an extension of Limgrave, and when you go northwest from Stormvale Castle, the environment will transition from what you've seen in Limgrave into a giant lake with the ruins of churches and buildings littered throughout it. Not really much to say here. The game has the best variety of weapons and items in the Soul series, carrying over many of the things that made the items in Dark Souls 3 good and adding to it, namely the weapon art system. In DS3, every weapon had a weapon art, which was a unique skill for that weapon. Many of the more common weapons shared weapon arts, but the more unique ones would get their own weapon art. This was mainly reserved for boss weapons, but not entirely. Elden Ring has carried over that system, but changed the name to Ash of War, and made it to where on certain weapons, mainly common ones, you can change the weapon art on your weapon, allowing for more customization in builds. Whenever you change the Ash of War on your weapon, it will also change the stats, mainly by lowering the base damage it does but increasing its scaling. So say you have the Greatsword, an already powerful armament with a high strength requirement. You can change the Ash of War on it, so now it has lower base damage, but it has better scaling with strength. Now, the more points you put into strength, the more damage that specific weapon will do. This all goes for all of the common weapons in the game, and the stat will be dependent on what weapon type it is. I do think this is a good system, as it adds to the variety of weaponry within the game, since you could have multiple copies of the same sword, but they could have different Ashes of War. Maybe one is better in certain situations than the other. The variety in armor is also nice as well, with the typical mage or sorcerer robes being present as well as the typical tanky knight armor. Shields in Souls games have always been borderline useless, and generally are disregarded by players, and are only really used for their passive effects, such as the Grass Crest Shield, which, as long as it is equipped by the player, will increase their stamina regeneration. The reason shields were never used is simple: they were ineffective in combat. When you used a shield to block, it would indeed serve its purpose and block the attack coming toward you, provided you have the stamina, but the issue was that you would remain in place, your stamina would regen slower than if you hadn't raised your shield, and if you ran out of stamina from blocking too much, your posture would be broken, and you would be left vulnerable for a few seconds. All in all, they were pretty bad. Now, in Elden Ring, they are one of the best tools for dealing with most normal enemies. They do all the same things they did before, but they now have one new ability tied to them: guard counters. When you block and an enemy hits your shield, if you press the heavy attack button, your character will do a guard counter. It does about the same amount of damage as a heavy attack, almost always staggers the enemy, and allows you to either back off of an enemy or press on with a follow-up attack. With this one addition, shields have been made into an actually desirable item. One of the first major issues I noticed within the game was the similarity in many of the areas, mostly within the open world. From the Weeping Peninsula all the way to Liurnia looks almost exactly the same, to the point where I actually forgot which region I was in at one point. This is a sizable issue, but is mostly a nitpick for me. There are obvious changes in the terrain when you get to, say, Caelid, where everything is rotting, or in the mountaintops of the Giants, where everything is covered in snow. But the fact that the Weeping Peninsula, Limgrave, and Liurnia all look nearly identical was certainly something I had to make a comment on. The field bosses make up the majority of the boss count in Elden Ring, and that was to be expected. After all, it is an open world game, and so there can only be a certain amount of bosses that are actually relevant to the story and have 30 pages worth of backstory to them. However, the problem with world bosses is that in many cases they are either so ridiculously weak that you can defeat them without even having to try, or they are legitimately stronger and or harder than the story bosses. Yeah, the story bosses, you know, those guys that are children of a goddess, yeah, those ones. In most of your encounters with a world boss, you will walk up to it expecting a fair fight, only to be killed with a single hit because you weren't a high enough level to even have a chance of taking it on. This is terrible because there's no way to know if the boss will be able to instantly kill you. The game does not give you any indicator on if the boss you are about to fight is good for what level you're at, or if you need to leave and gain 20 levels or something like that. This all leads to inevitable player frustration, which is not exactly something a game should be aiming for. Dark Souls has always been about bosses. The typical gameplay loop for Dark Souls 1 through 3 was to have the player going around in self-contained areas, preparing themselves for the next boss. And that gameplay loop is completely destroyed in Elden Ring, because there's a boss around every corner. The player does not have enough time to properly prepare themselves for whatever boss is coming up, because the world is so open that you could run around for 10 minutes, not fighting anything, not gaining any runes, and then all of a sudden, you just happen upon a world boss that you realistically aren't prepared for. Another issue that many of these bosses share is artificially extending the fight, creating artificial difficulty. The longer that the player has to fight the boss, the harder they think it is. The best example of this is Gale and all of his clones. He has at least 3 attacks that involve him flying into the air and running away from the player to create distance, thereby forcing the player to get on the horse to catch up to him and removing the player's defensive capabilities since they can't roll while riding the horse. Usually when Gale does this, he follows it up with a fire breath attack that can instantly kill the player or stun lock them until they die. It is my personal belief that Radon is the worst fight in all of Elden Ring. The reasons for this are his overwhelming strength and the placement of his fight within the story. It is not required to beat Radon before advancing past Stormvale Castle, which is good, but I think Radon would have been better suited as a very late game boss. The area in which you fight Radon expects you to be about level 50, and so the boss fight is intended to be fought at around level 50. This is where the issues begin to arise. The boss itself is amazing to watch, a brilliant spectacle of giant swords being swung by a giant man on a tiny horse shooting out purple lightning. Fighting the boss is an entirely different story. To begin with, when you enter the arena, you see it is a huge open field of red sand, with arrows stuck in the ground everywhere you see, and you can even see Radon all the way over on the opposite side of the arena. Then, you see him move, and a purple light shines in front of him. Unless you already know what's about to happen, in about 2 seconds, you are now dead. Radon shoots magic arrows that will randomly either one-shot you or leave you with about a third of your health remaining. And you know what he does after he shoots an arrow at you? Pulls another one out and does it again. He'll continuously do this until you get to a certain range, and then he'll copy Aldrich and shoot a volley of arrows that tracks you as you move, and at the same time shoot clusters of great arrows at you. If you get hit by the clusters, you'll be stunned for a moment, and likely then get stuck in the volley and die. It is impossible to determine where the gap in the cluster of arrows will be, as they come at you so fast you won't be able to react in time, so it's purely luck if you do manage to avoid it. If you can manage to avoid all of that, you are rewarded with him putting his bow away and taking out his 2 massive greatswords. Now is the hard part of the fight, the actual fight. The actual fight against Radon suffers from the same problems as the rest of the bosses in the game. He will either do a massive attack with a huge amount of delay to it, so you're baited into rolling, or too early, or just not at all, or he will do some seemingly endless combo of swings in various directions that, if not dodged nearly perfectly while in their range, will result in your death. To combat this egregious enemy, you are allowed to summon 8 NPCs to help you in the fight, all of them being NPCs you've met throughout the game. This sounds completely busted, right? Well, you would be wrong, because all of the NPCs die in 2 or 3 attacks from Radon, and do such a little amount of damage to him that their only remaining purpose is to take the aggro from Radon, while you sneak behind him and get an attack or 2 in before he moves out of your range and then focuses his attention on you. Take all of this in, as well as the fact that almost every attack he does will either leave you with half of your health or kill you with one blow. And guess what, buddy? You're not even in the second phase yet. Once Radon reaches around half health, he'll jump into the air and disappear. All is quiet for a moment, then you hear something. A very large something. Indeed, it is Radon, cosplaying as a meteor, flying through the sky, all while still on his horse. This is fairly easy to dodge, as long as you have some sense of depth perception. He'll crash into the ground, and this is when Phase 2 really starts. He has pretty much the same attacks as before, but with a few new additions to his moveset. For one, he'll summon a small amount of giant floating rocks using gravity magic, and they will ominously hover above him until he decides to throw them at you. And they also happen to home in on you, and will one-shot you if they land. Another attack he gets is to slam his swords into the ground, create a small AoE explosion, and summon a cluster of small homing rocks, which will zoom towards you. And if they hit, they will stun lock you. And he will follow up this attack with another, running up to you, jumping, and slamming his swords into the ground, killing you if it hits. I understand that Radon in the lore is regarded as the most powerful demigod, having the ability to hold back the stars, master the art of gravity magic, and wield dual greatswords nearly as big as him. But that is no reason to artificially increase the difficulty of the fight by making every attack stunlock you or kill you in one hit. I also find it odd that they put this boss in such an early part of the game, being Caelid. This is an area that, based on where it is located on the map, you should be around level 40 or 50 for it, in order to explore it and reliably kill the enemies within. So why is it then that the main boss of the area expects you to be around level 50 to 60? And really, that's the bare minimum you could do to reliably kill him. I wrote all of this before the patch, and now Radon has been nerfed extremely. He does seem more fair for a level 50-ish player, but that begs the question. Why did they ship the game out with him as powerful as he was? Now I want you to imagine everything I said about pre-patch Radon, and double it. We now have the Fire Giant. Fire Giant encompasses everything that made Radon annoying, but this time he is required to progress the story. Nearly all of Fire Giant's attacks will one-shot you or stunlock you. He'll roll away before you can get a good amount of attacks in, and he has a ridiculous amount of health. Do keep in mind, my character did not have a lack in vigor. I had 33 at the time of fighting FG, and 25 or so when fighting Radon, so it wasn't like I had no points in vigor. Anyway, FG is worse than Radon in my opinion, because if you wanted, you could skip Radon. There's no ending in Elden Ring that allows you to skip or bypass the Fire Giant. For those who have not played Dark Souls 3 or its DLC, Gale, otherwise known as Slave Knight Gale, was the pinnacle of boss design up to that point. He represents how far From Software had come in terms of designing how a boss fight should go. He wasn't the hardest boss by any means. That title would probably go to Dark Eater Midir, but the reason Midir is so difficult is because he has a very large health pool and does extremely high amounts of damage with every attack. Midir is difficult in the way that many bosses in the first Dark Souls game were difficult, in a sort of almost unfair manner, where the player is expected to surpass the challenge in front of them through sheer skill alone, similar to many retro games of the past. Gale, I would say, is the pinnacle of Dark Souls bosses because he is the most engaging. No part of Gale's fight feels unfair or unbalanced. He never does anything to one-shot you, and he gives ample time between attacks to throw in your own. Why do I bring these up in a video about Elden Ring? Because to me, Elden Ring does not have a Gale. All I see in Elden Ring is a field of Midirs, with even more health and even more damage, and they aren't just in the endgame areas, no, they are everywhere. It baffles me as to how they were able to create Gale as a perfect boss fight, and then seemingly not transfer or utilize any of that skill or experience when designing the bosses in Elden Ring. It feels as though every boss in Elden Ring uses the Midir philosophy of killing the player in one hit, using map-wide AoEs, and seemingly endless combos. For a game that supposedly offers an extremely wide array of customization and optimization in different builds, magic sure is overpowered. Magic has always been pretty strong in the Dark Souls games, but never, ever to this degree. The fact that within 30 minutes of starting the game, you can get gear powerful enough to one-shot every boss up to or maybe even past Renala is absurd. Especially when you consider that there is no item or set of items that are comparable to that in any melee build. Magic in Elden Ring has had such a drastic buff that it almost acts as an easy mode. You can do good damage at a distance, and the only real cost is FP. You can get far enough away from the enemy or boss you are fighting that they can't hit you with anything, but many of the magic attacks in the game home in on the enemy you are targeting. The worst offender of this, and the leading reason as to why magic builds are so good, is the Comet Azure. You can get it ridiculously easily, as all that is required to get it is to speak to an NPC that doesn't even talk back to you. You just talk to him and you get the sorcery. By simply running to where the NPC is and talking to him, you have now acquired the most powerful spell in the game. Now, all that is left to do is to collect a few other items, and you have created the most broken build in the game that can carry you into victory, no matter the circumstance. For a more detailed explanation on this build, I will leave a link in the description. Iron Pineapple goes through the whole process of getting the build and also makes good videos in general, definitely watch. In the video, he says that Elden Ring is the most accessible FromSoft game because you can get really strong very early in the game, with minimal fighting. The issue with that statement is when you look at any build other than magic. Which leads me to... Strength builds have always been a staple of the Soulsborne series, and a lot of the time they are a generally good option for newer players, as it utilizes the core aspects of Dark Souls combat the most, that being attack, wait for the enemy to attack, roll, attack, repeat. The primary issue with greatswords in Elden Ring goes back to what I said about the bosses. The fact that they are so much faster than before, coupled with the natural slowness of a greatsword, makes it so by the time the boss decides to end their anime-esque combo, you swing your sword, but it is so slow that the boss will, in some cases literally, jump away from you. Or they will begin another attack of some kind that, even if you have some of the heavier armor with good poise, will always interrupt your swing, trapping you in either an insta-kill grab attack, an insta-kill AoE, or an insta-kill combo. Combine all of this with the fact that dexterity builds will almost always have bleed as an extra source of damage, magic builds will have preposterously high damage for the range that they get, and faith builds just generally get good magic abilities. It's almost like From Software doesn't want you to play the game the way you want to play it, they want you to play it in the way they want. And that is especially ironic when they have touted Elden Ring as having an extremely large amount of build variety that is supposedly available all game, when in reality, this is a blatant lie. The entire point of a strength build is to wait for that one chance when the enemy has their guard down, and when you land that one attack, it will deal a lot of damage. But because of how fast the bosses, and some normal enemies too, attack, you have to wait a ridiculous amount of time for the boss to finish their epic flashy anime combo attack that will kill you if you mistime a single roll. I do not enjoy the horse, mechanically or story-wise. It feels like the game world was designed around the horse, just so FromSoft could justify having horseback combat in the game. The horse itself controls just fine, but it is the application of the horse into the game that irks me. It is only used as a method of transportation, nothing more. You can't even upgrade the horse to move faster, which will become a very large annoyance as you begin to notice that the horse is, in reality, kind of slow. The horseback combat I have many issues with. It feels clunky and slow, and if you don't have a good depth perception, you will not be hitting anything anytime soon. It doesn't matter if you have the largest sword with the largest hitbox, you will miss half of your swings because the hitbox is so particular with where it goes, and your character swings the sword in such an unorthodox manner that it is a miracle if you hit anything that isn't the size of a troll. I have had people tell me, use the horse in combat, it's OP, when in reality, it is only really good for large groups of enemies, since you can swing and get a hit in, and also be running away at the same time. For bosses, however, getting on the horse is not the most wise decision, as it limits your ability to effectively avoid an attack since you cannot roll because, well, I don't know if you noticed, but you're on the back of a horse. Another reason for why the horse is bad in combat is it is as fragile as a piece of paper. If you get staggered by anything, good luck not getting stun-locked, because if you do, that horse is going down and you will be left very vulnerable on the ground, unable to move for multiple seconds. This was made especially evident to me in the fight against Radon. As for why I don't like the horse story-wise, it just decided that it likes the player tarnished, and so now you are its master because video game. Very epic Miyazaki, very cool, 10 out of 10 masterpiece, flawless writing, take your paycheck and get out of here. The weapon upgrade system has both gotten better and gotten worse. In DS3, all you needed to upgrade almost any weapon was one of the Titanite items, and the more special weapons would need Twinkling Titanite to be upgraded. This system has essentially been transferred into Elden Ring, but a lot more weapons need Somber Smithing Stones, which is the equivalent to Twinkling Titanite. Basically, any weapon you really want to use that will be worth your time will need Somber Smithing Stones, which from my experience were a lot more annoying to get. This is not normally something I would complain about when it comes to a game, especially an open world title, but this was something that annoyed me a lot. To me, it feels like Elden Ring has overstayed its welcome with the sheer length of the game. Over time, it slowly became more and more annoying to go back to it, because it felt like I wasn't making any meaningful progress. It became more and more of a slog to play, because it just kept going on and on and on. I would have been fine with the game being so long if it didn't have all the issues I've stated previously in this video. All of those factors, the bosses taking too long to fight, every enemy dealing too much damage, not being able to stick to one playstyle, all just made the game almost boring to keep going through. In conclusion, Elden Ring is a shell of a perfect game, held back by many things that induce tedium, annoyance, and frustration from the player. It seems like for every step forward, it takes 2 steps back. FromSoft has fixed many of the things that made previous Souls games suffer, but as a result of making an open world, has brought in many new issues that, to me, are far worse. At the time of writing this, I haven't beaten the game yet, but I know exactly what is left for me to do. I need to beat Godskin Duo, cry, beat Malekith, cry some more, go fight Godfrey again, cry a lot more, and end it all with Radon and the Elden Beast. The only thing keeping me from doing these bosses and actually finishing the game before making this review is grinding. Just like every boss in this game, it is not a matter of skill, it is a matter of how much health you have and or how much damage you can do in a quick fashion. If you have the health to tank their hits, the damage you deal won't matter as much because you have the health to draw out the fight. On the other hand, if you do a lot of damage very quickly, then your health won't matter as much. The main problem with my character is that, with the current stats, it's like a balanced dex build, and because I haven't spec'd into dex enough, my damage output isn't fast enough to make up for the bosses doing massive amounts of damage. I will eventually go back and do a playthrough with a magic build, but that probably won't be for a while. If you just want something to sink time into and are willing to put up with the balancing issues, then I would recommend this game for you, especially if you are of the patient type. Otherwise, I honestly would say to skip this game and just play DS3 or Sekiro instead, because those games don't have the issues that Elden Ring has. It feels good to have said all of this. I definitely want to try some more of these longer styled videos in the future, and I have a couple of ideas for what I can do. I hope this was entertaining, informative, or good background noise for you. Take care, and, video game.